and for all we know, they're working on the Pyro pack and the jungle theme stuff, but at the speed that they operate, that can still take a long time.
So, just 1 week after the game's 10th anniversary, TF2 was finally graced with the one update to rule them all, also known as the Jungle Inferno update. And unless you've been living in a different part of this multiverse, you're probably well aware of this, and otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video, so I don't know why I need to tell you about this. Anyways, I'm fulfilling my duty as a YouTuber here and making a video on the update, just like everybody else. I also know this means that my opinions may or may not overlap with other people's, but hey, that's unavoidable. There's only so many things you can say about certain topics. I know I'm stupidly late on this, Halloween is already out and the update came out a while ago and I could have made a video way sooner, but I wanted to have a more detailed, thought out and structured video on the entire thing instead of just releasing a video for the sake of releasing one. So, what's so special about this update other than the fact that it took an absurdly long amount of time to be released, with virtually nothing in between this one and the last update? Well, after 460 days of existential dread, we finally got to see what Valve had been holding from us for so long. Now, this update is big. Is it 460 days plus big? Probably not, but for a comparison, the last time we did get a 4-day long update was the Uber update all the way back in 2011. Regardless of that, I wouldn't say that this update is as big of a deal as the Uber update was, but it's pretty darn close. Sure, I wouldn't place it on top of my fireplace as some sort of trophy, but it's still pretty okay. And that's the general term I'd like to start out with here. Okay. Because I would end up repeating myself a lot, I'm just gonna say it preemptively here. The update is okay. Some parts of it are pretty good, I'd argue outstanding even, and really well made. And some other ones are rather questionable and could have definitely been handled differently. The rest of it is just somewhere in between the two extremes, decent, acceptable, nice, or whatever you may want to dub it. I'll obviously be going into more detail on this, so don't worry, I won't just let this stand completely unjustified. Alright, the maps, the bread and butter of every update sandwich. You usually don't want to fuck these up, and overall I'd say this part's been handled pretty well. Not only did we get 6 of them, Valve have actually decided to make a map themselves, and have clearly shown us as to why they don't design maps anymore. Oh boy, how much I love Mercenary Park. Before I get into any kind of power ranking for these maps, just bear in mind that I will not be taking into account the fact that they all look really pretty. Making these maps look good was clearly the focus of them, but it has no impact on the overall ranking if this can be applied to every single one of them. Save maybe Brazil. So my personal power ranking for the maps is the following. And this is based on mostly my own experience as well as some outside sources that I've just gathered over the past weeks. Let's start from the top here with Lazarus, a fun King of the Hill map, and it seems to switch up the usual viaduct meta that we've seen so many King of the Hill maps use over the past couple of years. It's not just the idea of having spawn, then a building with free passages, an open area followed by another free passages, and then the point before ending up being mirrored to the other side. Lazarus actually seems to operate at a different angle and kind of reminds me more of Nucleus for some reason. I don't know, I may just be talking out of my ass here, but for me Lazarus was a refreshing map and actually kind of fun to play on. Despite that, it seems to have some optimization issues because it is one of the maps that I lose most of my frame rate on when playing on it. That may just be my shitty PC though, I don't know. So next up, we have Enclosure, a free-stage payload map, and fuck dude, it's been a while since we've seen one of these, and we don't talk about that last one anymore, nuh-uh. It seems a little open in some areas, while suffering from choking in others, but overall it's a very fun map to play, albeit maybe a little too long. Mossrock is a rather classic 2CP map, and up until the second point it's actually pretty fun to play on too. The elaborate flank routes are interesting, and it's an overall well-designed map. The second point though, oh goodness why. The terrain isn't even the major issue, it just adds on to it. I think the major problem really is that the spawn is just way too close to the point, and it gets very stale very quickly. Also, what the fuck is this sightline? What the fuck, dude? It's an okay map though. So Banana Bay is basically Hightower, but a little better. That's not saying a whole lot considering that Hightower is an awful map, but Banana Bay is definitely in the same vein. I don't enjoy Hightower personally, but I can definitely see the appeal of just wanting to mess about and not giving a single fuck about any kind of objective, and Banana Bay can definitely work in a similar way. There's lots of verticality to jump around in, for instance, there's fuck tons of water, so pyroshocking is actually legitimately viable, you can just do whatever you want as any class, everybody's got something to do in this map. The map's also really tiny, so there's always an enemy near you, keeping you on edge. All of this just makes for a great free-for-all, just do whatever the fuck you want map and don't bother, and that's great. It's also neat how it makes use of the cactus candy mechanic that has just vanished into the ether, but for someone that had to actually do a contract on the map that required you to play the objective, it wasn't all that fun for the most part. So Brazil has some competitive history and it wasn't received all too nicely back when, but it's still in the game now and you can clearly see that it was worked on a lot. If you're not currently busy getting lost in the giant maze of houses, you're probably out in the open getting spammed from some sort of high ground. The map is okay to play, it's just way too large for a King of the Hill map in my opinion. Even in a full server, half of the map will probably have next to nobody in it while everybody's busy fighting for the point. I also think it's a weird choice to have the control point be the highest ground in the map, with nothing higher to attack the point from. Almost every other King of the Hill map, or map in general for that matter, has some sort of higher ground next to the point, either to make defending easier without having to stand on a point, or to make attacking the point easier. Overall, it's an okay map though. And last and sadly definitely least, we've got the biggest culprit of Valve maps themselves, Mercenary Park, a typical Valve CP map. That's really all there is to say about it. It's just choke point after choke point, it's claustrophobic, closed ceilings, it's not really fun to play at all. Last is literally impossible to cap if the defending team has like more than 2 engineers, and this one fucking sentry spot is just stupidly strong. I definitely won't be playing this map much outside of my contracts I had to do on it, it's just not a fun map. That's all there is to say. So the reworked choose your own adventure contract system is good. Valve have completely nailed this one. The ability to work on your contracts at your own pace whilst not having to wait a week for like 2 more contracts that you can do within 30 minutes is amazing. The weapon and class contracts were really fun and actually encouraged me to use some weapons I would have never touched. For instance, I had no idea how fun the backscatter can be in pubs if I hadn't done the contract associated with it. Some of the bonuses are completely insane and grindy though, and are just a wonderful validation of the Valve just don't play their own game meme. This is especially true for map contracts though. Not only are some of the bonuses stupid, but Valve, why are you forcing me to play some of the worst maps in the game, just for the sake of completion? Sure, this is my own fault for wanting to 100% all the contracts, but my god, some of them were awful to achieve. I still shudder at the thought of having to play fucking Dust Bowl. Ugh. They were fun to do though. Having an objective to play towards is great, and I hope we'll see more campaigns and whatnot way more often in the future. I actually livestreamed my entire contract grind over on Twitch, and after sitting through the pain of having to complete objectives on 2-Fort, Turbine and Hightower, I actually completed the whole thing, both the free Pyroland contracts and the paid campaign, in a little over a week. So when talking about contracts, you also have to talk about the new skins, or much rather, the new warpaints. I like having the choice of what to actually put my skin on. It's much better than the previous system of just being stuck with whatever weapon the skin came with. The system is still imperfect though, simply because you can't apply the warpaint to existing items, because using it instead creates a new item. I still do not have much of a reason to use my fancy skin over my strange weapon that I've used for years, because the skin just won't track my kills. But I guess that's unavoidable because Valve has to make money some way, right? The greatest bummer about this whole thing though is that you cannot have strange versions of the Dragon Slayer skins. With the other skins at least, you know, you can trade up or unbox a strange version, but there is literally no way to acquire a strange Dragon Slayer skin. So as sick as this thing may look, I really have no reason at all to use it over a strange counterpart. So please Valve, if I can make one request, just give us Dragon Slayer Stranger Fires at least. That would be very, very cool. Overall, the skins are really cool though. Oh yeah, right, another thing that like every major update has are new taunts and cosmetics. That's cool and all I guess, but I just generally don't really care for them. Sure, the community has done a great job on them, and they all look great, and the taunts are all great. I mean, I cared enough for the engineer taunts to buy both of them, so hey, they allow for neat things, you know, I'm not unfailable. But I just generally don't really care, especially not for new cosmetics, because there's already so many in the game, and these new ones just add to the pile that I can't be asked anymore to care about them. Like, we already have 5 different shirts for scouts, so what difference is another one gonna make? I'm just ignorant though, so you shouldn't really take my opinion on cosmetics. They look cool, that's all I can say about them. So let's get into the meat of this sandwich, the new weapons. It's been almost 3 years since we last saw any new weapons in this game, and that is completely understandable. Why would Valve bother adding new weapons to the game when half of the ones that are currently in the game are almost useless? We did get 5 new ones though, and some are actually pretty darn unique. So let's start out with the Dragon's Fury, and this shit is already being dubbed as overpowered by many people, and I can actually see why too. I would argue though that it is not overpowered and just slightly too strong right now, and that this completely functionally different flamethrower just needs slight bits of tweaking in order to balance it correctly. The idea of a skill-indexed weapon for Pyro that actually rewards hitting your shots is great, but at least you should make the shots hard to hit. Right now, the weapon effectively changes Pyro's playstyle from W mouse 1 to W mouse 1 with slight bits more aiming at a larger range. The projectile is just ridiculously fast, and the large hitbox makes it almost impossible to miss. If you combine that with the increased fire rate on consecutive hits, you'll be annihilated by this thing really quickly. Now that is definitely the intention, considering that many other classes can do the same thing and kill you very quickly. But it shouldn't be so easy. That also makes it slightly unfun to fight against when like 5 people on each team use it, but overall it's a fun weapon to use. Oh, and it also works underwater for some reason. I'm almost certain that that is not intended. Next up is the jetpack. A fucking jetpack. Pyro has a fucking jetpack now. And you know what the worst part about this is? It's not even that good. Sure, the thing is fun to use, and it certainly opens up a lot of new mobility and new options to Pyro, but the way it's implemented is ultimately what's holding back the jetpack from being truly amazing. If the jetpack was implemented as some sort of passive ability, the Pyro would have been changed entirely and would have been even more interesting. This does not mean, though, that the current implementation is not fine. I like it the way it is, but the switch speed is really what hurts the jetpack's usefulness overall. It's clearly not an item designed to make Pyro be able to do aggressive jetpack bombs, as the switch speed just doesn't allow for that, but it is instead a tool almost exclusively useful for flanking and added mobility, and it's fun enough in that sense to be used, I guess. The gas can is an interesting area denial item. That's it, really. You just chuck it down on a point or in a choke, and people will be wanting to avoid walking through there for a little while. Even if Afterburn is not that great of a threat, more often than not, you probably catch yourself dying to it or just wanting to avoid it in general, and that's really the only strength of the gas passer. It seems that killing about 2 people is already enough to recharge it fully, so even though it has a slow recharge time, dealing damage does certainly alleviate that a little bit. But even then, the gas passer seems like a rather niche item that you won't be using that often. Oh yeah, as a little fun fact by the way, people covered in gasoline can even get ignited by just taking fall damage. I thought it was just a funny little thing. So the hand is basically a straight downgrade from stock. Sure, the speed boost might make it a little bit easier to land consecutive hits, but the lower damage and the fact that you actually have to land 2 hits in order to even deal the full damage in 1 click makes it nothing better than a meme weapon. Sure, it fares very well as a fucking meme weapon though. Everything from the animations to the sounds to the fact that it really wants to let people know that you slapped them just makes it perfect for that sense. And you can just mess around with it, and that's a-okay. So last, but hey, definitely not least for once, we have the banana for heavy. There's not actually much to say about it. It's a very decent side grade to the sandwich if your team is lacking medics or if you're just on your own more than you'd like, and it's clearly designed for a more mobile style of heavy. I really like the banana. I didn't expect that it would be this good, but it's actually really good. So once you've talked about the new weapons, you also have to talk about the existing ones, and there are fuck tons of balance changes in this update. Some of them are completely justified and others are rather questionable. There's lots and lots of them to talk about here, and I'll be keeping it condensed and only talk about the most relevant ones. Let's start out with the Pyro, you know, the focus of the update and the changes they've made to him. So, Pyro is actually a threat now. It's something that I still have to get used to, but Pyros can actually kill you rather quickly now, which places him more in line with his other two attack category counterparts, and that's good. The Flamethrower is much more consistent to use, and the particles actually make sense now. They might be a little bright, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm staring right into the fucking sun, but for the most part they're fine. They also made the Flux particles accurate, which is great. Air Blast is not bullshit to fight against anymore, and it actually just sends you into a different realm now instead of stun locking you, all the while being more consistent, so that's cool too. Pyro just isn't useless anymore. He actually is fun to play now, and he doesn't feel like he's getting cucked by the game's terrible hit registration anymore, and that's amazing. Most of the rebalancing done to the existing items is, as already mentioned, completely justified. The buffs or nerfs were either needed, or the reasoning behind them is completely understandable, and most of them are not even that noteworthy, but a few of them do stand out, and I will mention those. So on the long end of the stick, we have stuff like the Pretty Boy's Pocket Pistol or the Panic Attack, which are now finally useful and actually pose as really decent side grades to their stock counterparts. Additionally, you have stuff like the Bison and the Claymore that are now back in their old forms, which is amazing. On the flip side though, there are some changes that are highly questionable. The most controversial one of them all is definitely the Ambassador. The stock revolver is just better in every way now, except for some very niche situations. I can, however, at least slightly understand Valve's reasoning as to why they wanted to nerf the Ambassador, even if I don't think that it needed any changing. Valve just didn't want Spy to be some sort of second sniper, even if that takes immense amounts of skill, and it was barely ever relevant to begin with. And considering that they really wanted to change the Ambi's effective range for some unknown reason, I suppose they went about doing so in the best way possible, instead of relying on RNG like they initially proposed a couple of months ago. Woolen has actually made a great video going into much more detail on this weapon, and I encourage you to go and watch it. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that the Diamondback is still completely unchanged while the Ambassador got shat on. Way to go, dude. On the topic of useless weapons, I also have to talk about the Sandman Cleaver combo. May God rest its soul. I agree with the Sandman nerf, you know, getting stun locked sucks. But why did Valve feel the need to remove the one stat that made the Cleaver unique? Why make it nothing more than a spam weapon for a little bit of useless bleed damage? There's basically just no reason to use it at all now. And the last change that seemed to have sparked some sort of controversy is the GRU nerf, and I guess to some extent also the eviction notice one. I can mostly agree with this one though. The old GRU traded Heavy's one downside, his speed, for virtually no downside by themselves. You took a little bit more damage, but that doesn't matter because you're gonna use the GRU outside of a fight anyways. Now, the new GRU trade his massive upside, his health, in order to alleviate his massive downside, his speed. It's a simple scaling principle, so to say. You trade an advantage and get rid of a disadvantage at the same time. And it makes the weapon much more balanced overall, so I can agree with the change. As far as the rest of the update goes, I'd argue it's all pretty good. Perhaps the highlight for me are the new UI changes. I can finally queue for casual while doing all kinds of other things, which has actually made casual fun to play again. When the servers shat themselves, as they usually do when a big update launches, this was especially useful as queuing would take upwards of 30 minutes. So being able to join a community server in the meantime, like my own, was very helpful. The party system is also real good. Valve may have taken a slice from Overwatch here, but at least they took the good slice and implemented it well, so you can't really blame them. Oh yeah, and the bottle breaks again. I never thought I'd live to see this day, but it has finally happened. The bottle breaks again. Oh yeah, right, I said that there were some parts that were a little bad. Right, yeah, there are a few things that we were quote-unquote promised and we didn't get. Most notably, changes to competitive matchmaking. Any kind of changes that you may have heard about in the past have still not been shipped, as Valve are holding off on them a little longer. So for now, we'll just have to deal with comp still being the broken mess that it is, and hope that the graceful Valve gods will eventually patch it so it works well, and will also miraculously revive it at the same time. This is a big disappointment for now, because, you know, it is in dire fucking need of some changes. So they could have easily, you know, been the most important part of the update if they had actually shipped. Aside from that, it's a very solid update though. It's definitely not something that we should have had to wait 460 days for, but it still is one of the biggest updates to ever grace this game, and if seen by itself, it's really fucking good. I'm also actually surprised by the speed at which early bugs and issues were addressed, and I really hope that we can expect more updates of maybe not this size, but at the very least of this quality in the future. Oh, and you know, not waiting for more than a year would be great too, I guess.